So for step number 4, that's overlaying washes. It's going to be done with a medium-sized brush, wet on dry. I'm going to start by taking just a little bit of yellow, wet on dry, and I'm just doing a color test. I actually need a little more yellow. So let's do a darker version. I want to do variations of dark yellow and light yellow. And I know you have a very limited palette. Just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to cheat and show you my real palette. And I'm going to use a couple of different variations of yellow so you can just see what that's going to look like. So the reason that you would use overlaying washes is, let's say you're painting a green landscape. You could buy a tube of green paint, paint the green landscape. You could buy yellow and blue, mix them together on your palette as we have done here, and paint the green landscape. Or you could do overlaying washes where you would basically paint the landscape in yellow first, and then you would go over it in a light blue. And then ultimately you would have hints of yellow, hints of green, hints of blue. It'd be a much more dynamic way of working. I'm also going to include a little bit of orange just for variety here. I've been finding the more experience I get, the better I am as a painter, the more I'm using this technique, because it just, you see more of a separation of colors and it's just really beautiful. So I'm doing light and dark variations of warm colors. I'm going to let that dry and return to it after I finish number 6. So let's, I'll let you pause and do that, and then we'll do number 5. Number 5 is going to be wet on wet. It's a variegated wash. What that means is I'm going to put a lot of water down using my big wash brush, and then I'm going to go in and add blasts of different colors. Think about a variegated wash working nicely for a painting of autumn leaves or a flower bed, and I'm just doing blasts of color. You can see immediately that the wet on wet looks beautiful. It almost looks like tie-dye. And if you were to do this wet on dry, it would look more like polka dots. Also remember that you can use gravity as you do this. You can use the paper to drip or bleed the paint. And you can use as many colors as you like, painting willy-nilly. I do this in a much more controlled way when I paint faces. I'll do the skin tone, and then I'll use very controlled variegation to add rosiness into the cheeks or shadows into the eyes and so on. So I actually use this technique all the time, but not quite as quickly or drastically as what I've done here. If it's pooling up too much, you can use your paper towel to absorb the excess water. I think it works better when you have a good amount of water, but it will take longer to dry, obviously. You can always use a blow dryer as well, just to blow dry it. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry, and I'm gonna let you pause and do this one. The next one is going to be dry on dry. Now for this one, I want you to use a paper towel to dry off a brush. So you want a dry brush. Now here I have damp paint, so there needs to be some level of dampness for dry on dry to work. This palette is totally dry, so if I have a totally dry brush and totally dry paint, I'm not going to be able to pick up anything, nothing's gonna happen. So I need some moisture in order to let it work. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to just take a little bit of paint on my brush, and you'll see it goes on almost stripy, very textured. And this is a good time to say that you should definitely always have a spare sheet of paper next to you so you can test out techniques, test your color, test your brush to make sure that it's giving you the look that you want. So very scratchy, sometimes stripy. This can be a nice technique for grass. You can scumble, which isn't great for your brushes, but it'll give you a very particular type of look. I use this technique a lot for hair and fur and texture, like rocks or grass. So that's dry on dry. I would say I generally start my painting wet on wet with a big brush, then I migrate to wet on dry with a medium-sized brush, and I end my painting with any dry on dry techniques I want, because of course if you were to put water over this, it would totally undo the textures that you've created. But don't overuse this. This technique can get really ugly really quickly. And that is another way that you can do it, is if you have just a little more water on the brush, just a little bit of moisture, but still get that scratchy look. That's dry on dry. I'll let you pause and do that, and then we're going to return to this one. Okay, so the last technique that I want to show you right now is I want to finish up the overlaying washes using various blue paints. This should be bone dry when you work on it. And I would say using more watered down blues are going to give you a little more of a gauge of what greens you're going to end up making, or neutral colors. I'm going to use my other palette so you can see a couple of other variations. So there's a cobalt. I need more paint on my brush. Let's do a cerulean. Let's do maybe a Prussian. Let's do a lighter version of the Prussian. And let's do some purples as well. So I've got a purple here. And let's use another purple from my palette here. And I'm just doing one strip. I'm not going back and forth at all, because I don't want to end up mixing these colors. I want to really let them sit on top of each other. So what I'm ultimately looking for are moments where I'm creating a brand new color. Some colors are going to look better than others. There's a nice neutral. There's a nice neutral. That's a nice neutral. That's a great brown. The really light yellow and light blue look nice together. So pick out moments so that you could use those colors together to do that overlaying wash. This is a great technique, and this is just a color test version of it. So we're gonna let this whole page dry. You can get some fresh water, and then we're gonna flip over the paper and do the other exercises on the back.